I wanted to I wanted to take a moment and talk about what your lens options are for the Kraken 612 camera. There are a lot of people out there who want to shoot a normal lens or a wide lens or a telephoto lens on a camera like this, which I consider a panoramic camera. It's got a 2-to-1 ratio. And they want to know what lens is going to be a normal lens, and they want to know what's going to be wide and what's going to be a telephoto, and it's a little bit complicated. So I wanted to decomplicate this concept and see if I can explain to you, and then at the end I'll give you recommendations for the type of lens that you're really looking for. So the first thing that I want to talk about is field of view versus focal length. Now, from the beginning of the commercial photography industry, we have seen that manufacturers of lenses and cameras will market lenses based on their focal length. So, like a 45 millimeter lens on a 35 millimeter point and shoot or rangefinder camera from the 1960s was a very common thing. And it said 45 millimeters. It didn't talk anything about the field of view. How wide do you get to see horizontally? How tall, do you get to see vertically in a degree of view type of concept? And when you only have one format, if and 35 millimeter was dominant from the 1960s through until we started getting the crop sensor SLRs, that 35 millimeter frame was really dominant. So we started talking about 35 millimeter equivalents. So, a 50 millimeter lens on a 35 millimeter camera is the same as, say, a 75 millimeter lens on a medium format 6x6 camera. Well, you kind of need to go a little bit deeper when you're talking about a panoramic camera. And let's talk a little bit about that, and I will get to answer your questions. And I will answer your questions not just in field of view, but in focal length for when you go out and start shopping for lenses. So, first of all, we have 3 different types. We have normal, we have wide, and we have tele lenses. And if we talk about the normal, or the average wide, not normal wide, but the average wide lens is a 28 to 35 lens. Now, I consider anything wider than 28 to be an ultra wide or a super wide or something like that. So I would say 28 to 35 is generally the zone for considered wide angle. Then we have normal, and normal goes from about 42 to about 58. And then 60 to 200 is tele, and of course past that 200 we get, the 500 millimeter really super tele lenses. So I'm just, the most common range in here, 28 to 200, and I'm going to break them down into that. But let's take a look. Oh, one more thing, and in medium format we have 40 to 65 is wide. 75 to 85 is normal, and 90 to 200 is tele. And that, these, you could argue on the edges of this. I'm not putting this up. I'm not hard and fast on these numbers. I just want to say, to give a general range. So let's take a look at the 35 millimeter frame. The 35 millimeter frame is actually 36 millimeters wide by 24 millimeters tall, and that's general. There are some cameras that shoot a little bit bigger and some cameras that shoot a little bit smaller, but this is the general view. Now, if we take this rectangle and we put a hypotenuse on it, we cut it in half diagonally, we get a number of 43.27. Now, there are purists out there who will say the only true way of knowing when you have a normal range is whether or not it's close to that hypotenuse number, and this is okay. This is an okay way to look at it. And really what you're looking at with the hypotenuse number is you're looking at an image circle. And now that I'm starting to do this video, I really wish I would have put an image circle on this. But if you go with an image circle that goes all the way around, we're going to pretend that I can actually run my mouse in a circle that goes all the way around. The diameter of that is the same as the hypotenuse, right? So we have an image circle right here of 43, give or take. Then the argument is that the normal lens is 43 millimeter, is a 43 millimeter image circle area. And that image circle area and the focal length are the same. Now, some lenses will throw, I know there are people out there tearing their hair out right now. There's some lenses out there with a 43 millimeter focal length that can throw a 60 millimeter image circle, or 70 millimeter or 120 millimeter. They're super wide lenses. But that's not really what I'm talking about. I want you to think about that image circle that you have to have, that 43 millimeter image circle, in order to cover this. The argument is that a 43 millimeter focal length is the perfect length for it. That's the argument on this. So let's just go with that. We're going to say that 43 millimeters, in this case for 35 millimeter camera, that's going to be normal. There's a lot of people who can argue either way on this, but we're going to just go with this one. So that means, yes, 43 millimeter lens is normal on 35, but let's take that 35 millimeter film and let's put it in an X-Pan. Or what's the Fuji version? I forget what the name of the Fuji version is, but the X-Pan, which is a panoramic camera. It's 24 millimeters tall, it's 65 millimeters wide, which means that the image circle that we need for this one is about 70 millimeters. So we need a 70 millimeter image circle, and then the argument is that you need a 70 millimeter lens to get that same normal. 70 millimeter lens is normal on an X-Pan? I'm not quite convinced, but I just want you to know these arguments. So let's take a look at the field of view. So now we have a 70 millimeter lens in the lower right hand corner. I'm for these next slides, I'm going to be talking about what lens we have. So we have a 70 millimeter lens. Well, the height, the angle of view for the height is 19.5. So let me talk about this. If you are looking out of this lens and you're looking through the viewfinder on that lens, from your eye, from that eyeball, from the retina or whatever it is that captures the light coming through that, if you can look up and you can look down, and you're going to have a 19.5 degree field of view. Now, left to right, you're going to have a 49 degree field of view with the X-Pan. Let's go back to the 35 millimeter frame. So back with the 35 millimeter frame, if we go back to that 43 millimeter lens, I've changed lenses. Look in the lower right hand corner, I've changed lenses. I'm on a 43 millimeter lens. That was that diagonal. My vertical field of view is not 19 anymore. It's 31 degrees. And my horizontal is 45. Okay, so let's think about that. 31 degrees by 45 degrees. And so that is going to give me, obviously, a different view left to right, or excuse me, a different view. Well, let's move on one frame. So now we've gone back, we've left the 43 millimeter lens on the camera. We've switched back to the X-Pan, and we still have that 31 degree field of view top to bottom, but now we can see 74 degrees left to right. So we've gone from 45 degrees left to right to 74 degrees left to right. So that really is, to me, the concept of a panorama. And because we're looking more sideways. Now, our top to bottom field of view is the same as it is in this 43 millimeter version of the X-Pan. Our top to bottom field of view is the same as the 35 millimeter frame, you know, the 24 by 36 millimeter frame, it is still that 31 degrees. So to me, a normal lens on an X-Pan is a 43 millimeter. In fact, the lens that people use on the X-Pan most commonly, I think it comes with like a 60 or a 45. It's the 45 that people want, because that they're getting the same vertical as you would get on a normal 35 millimeter frame, but they're getting more out to the edge. So that is one of the key concepts. So let's take a look at medium format. So because the Kraken is a medium format camera. So we have 56 millimeters by 56 millimeters. And that's the actual image size on most 120 cameras. 120, what we would call a 6x6 or a square format camera. Well, that diagonal is 79.2 millimeters. So we're going to put on an 80 millimeter lens. And what's the lens that you see on all those Hasselblads? 80 millimeter lens. So, okay, so we go to a field of view here that is 38 degrees by 38 degrees. So once again, if you're from the point of view of your eye, you look to the top of the finder, you can see 38, top of the finder to the bottom of the finder, that's a 38 degree swing, and it's the same thing left to right here. So, you know, once again, if we have that normal lens, that 80 millimeter image circle, 80 millimeter focal length. Let's take a look at the Kraken. So the Kraken is a 54 millimeter high by 110 millimeter wide image size. It's a little bit shorter top to bottom, and that is completely about my taste. I like to see the border in the photograph that's at the end, and with medium format, it's easier to scan it if it's just a little bit smaller. So I went with a 54 millimeter top to bottom. And it's 110 millimeters wide, and that gives us plenty of room in between frames, so you'll never get an overlapped frame on an accident with the Kraken. So that's the reason why I have 54 by 110. So let's take a look. The diagonal on this, 122. So if we're to take a 122 millimeter lens, it has that 122 millimeter image circle. We would get sorry, I went ahead a little bit early. We'd get a 25 degree vertical and a 48 degree horizontal. 25 vertical and a 48 degree horizontal. To me, if we go back to that 6x6, in fact, actually we can go forward to the 6x6 if we were 54 by 54, we would get this 25 degree by 25 degree image angle. Let me go back one more. But the normal view on 6x6 frame is about 38 degrees. So in order to get that 38 degrees, I'm going to go forward. In order to get that 38 degrees, we need to go to an 80 millimeter lens again on the Kraken. So again, now what this does is it gives you 37 degrees top to bottom, and a 69 degrees side by side, side to side. Now it's not quite as wide in aspect ratio as the X-Pan, but it does give you a wider view. So to me, if you want a normal vertical, and we'll talk about that in a second. Here we'll talk about we'll come to the conclusions in a second. Let's talk about one more thing. This is a 4x5 frame, so the white is a 4x5 frame. It's 100 millimeters by 120 millimeters. With a 160 millimeter lens, which a lot of people will say is normal, 150 to 160 millimeter lens is normal on 4x5. That's a 35 degree view vertically and a 43 degree view horizontally. So 35 degree view vertically, 43 degree horizontally on a 4x5, And a lot of people consider this normal lens. And by the way, the reason why I chose a 160 millimeter lens, the diagonal is 160 and some change, okay? So here are the conclusions. If you want a normal vertical view on the Kraken, you want a 75 or 70 millimeter to 85 millimeter lens. 70 millimeter to 85 millimeter lens, okay? If you want a normal horizontal view, so if that horizontal view is really important to me, or important to you, you want a 150 to 180 millimeter lens. 150 to 180 millimeter lens. So you're going to be, everything is going to fit kind of normally side to side, but the top is going to be cropped. It's going to be letterboxed off. If you want something in the middle, if you want an average of the two, a 105 to about 135 lens is a good lens. Now I've used both a 105 and a 135 on this. I've used a 65 millimeter lens, and I'm about to put on a 152 lens. So I'll let you know about that 152 lens. But I've used a 65 millimeter lens. It is beautiful on these. Now, one of the things that you'll get is in the corners, when you get that wide, even though we're talking about, we're talking about that first group, normal vertical, it's very wide. In the corners, you're going to start to get, the pincushion effect. You'll start to get, people's heads elongating into the corners and stuff like that. So you will have some of that. If you want to go to the bottom of the list, or excuse me, the second group, the 150 to 180, everything is going to look perfectly normal. You're not going to have any problems at all. If you want something in the middle, that 105 to 135, it is really kind of the sweet spot, I feel, but you make that decision. One of the things about this is once you buy the body, you get all of the lens cones. You can put any lens on it that you want that actually fits the system. And that's a little bit of a talk for another time. And I do have that talk about choosing lenses, but this is all about the focal length and angle of view.